Hey guys, how's it going? This is Matt Nader. Welcome back to your weekly dose of creepypasta. So today, I have a bit of a special story to bring to you guys. It is the first published story that an author has reached out to me in order to narrate. The author is Elle Pine. I've linked their Instagram, and I've just seen that they actually make some absolutely fire art, so I definitely recommend you check that out. And you can find an Amazon link to the horror anthology that this story is a part of in the description below if it interests you. So we are definitely in for a treat, but before we jump in, I know some people who are a real treat. It's the members of the Coven over on Patreon. Thank you all so much. Shoutouts as always to the Disciples, Tiffany, Subscribe SoundCloud, Backwards D-Dog, Ali G, Vera Ohio, Sylvia Kirschbaum, Jelly, Jim Jambonks, Seth B. Myers, Amber Lee Perry, Teddy Dog, and Brooklyn Gonzalez. You guys are fantastic. I appreciate you all. Now, as always, turn out the lights, get comfortable, and let the story begin. Shaw let out a triumphant whoop as the last echoes of gunshot faded into the trees. He marched over with long, confident strides to where the beast lay, but still displayed the caution that came with experience. He always had to be just a little careful, making sure things of that size were actually dead, and not just stunned. But he had his skill to count on, and the bullet had hit straight through the skull, leaving it lifeless by the riverbank, with its muzzle lolling in the mud, black eyes wide open and glassy, and its limbs buckled beneath it at odd angles. Shaw gave another exhilarated laugh, still rushing from the high of adrenaline and gunfire. He prodded the carcass with the tip of his steel-toed boot, before giving it a rougher nudge with the barrel of his gun, for good measure. That's gonna be 10,000 bucks from me. Now. He squatted down on the bank and peered closely at his kill, scratching at the black stubble on his neck. Just what the hell are you? He'd never seen anything like it before in his entire profession as a hunter, and now that the thrill of the hunt was over, he could allow himself to be curious. It looked like a weasel, if a weasel could grow to the size of a bear. Bigger, even. The head wasn't quite the right shape. The muzzle was too long, the head too bullet-shaped. The hind legs were short and beast-like, but there was something off about the front limbs. They were way too long, and too skinny, too human. They looked less like forelegs and more like arms, and that thought was off-putting to Shaw. The fur ended at the wrists, the paws just bare pink flesh, if they could be called paws. Really, they looked like hands, as big as Shaw's torso, each with 5 long fingers, so thin the knuckles stood out, round and knobbly, and tipped with a sleek black talon as long as a hunting knife. It wasn't something he'd relish facing off against. Well, good thing I'm smarter than you, ain't it? Shaw sneered, grasping the weasel-shaped abomination by the ear, lifting its head, and forcing its mouth open to examine the teeth. They were all long and pearly, sharp as razors. He let the head fall back against a bank, running a hand through its pelt. That was the best part of all. The whole body was covered in thick, snowy white fur, soft and downy to the touch. Shaw whistled. Oh, that'll fetch a price too. What do you think? Reckon he'll let me do what I want with your pieces if I barter with him? Laughing again, Shaw straightened up and started preparing the carcass for the haul back to his truck, securing it with harnesses and chatting mockingly to it all the while. He was in an exceptionally good mood. This was possibly the easiest hunt of his career, and would be the best paying one too. The man who owned the property had offered him $10,000. $10,000! And it hadn't taken him more than an hour of tracking. He'd only been scouting for trails that he could leave traps on, and the beast had practically dropped into his lap. It had simply arrived, lumbering out into the open, without so much as a look or cautious sniff around, entirely focused on getting a drink of water from the riverbank, making itself a perfect target. It hadn't even heard the click of the safety. It had been completely oblivious to the danger. Shaw laughed again as he thought about it. It almost seemed like robbery to ask for the full 10,000 with how easy this had been. But he wasn't stupid enough to cut the fee. He'd never get that kind of money for such an easy job ever again, and he'd take the blessing offered him. Whatever this thing was or how it had gotten there wasn't something he cared about. An animal was an animal, and though Shaw was partial to a challenge on occasion, they were all just meat and skins to him in the end. He'd parked his truck uphill at the mouth of the woods, where the river was no longer at ground level, but at the bottom of a steep bluff several yards high. This made hauling the carcass a task, but Shaw was in too good a mood to complain. Time hauling was time spent daydreaming about his plans for the money. Such thoughts made the work lighter, so in no time at all he had reached his truck. He was so engrossed in the hot, sweaty work of dragging the carcass onto the pickup bed and securing it, that a distant sound almost didn't catch his attention. Shaw paused, wiping his sweaty mullet out of his face and glaring into the trees. Instinct kept him alert, remaining still and quiet as he waited to hear it again, so that he might be able to define it. And he did hear it, a soft, guttural growl somewhere not too far off. Shaw cast a glance down at his prize, frowning. The big white creature's head had been bent and cocked to fit inside the truck bed, and it stared up at him with one filmy black eyeball, its mouth a grimace of death. Quite obviously not the source. As if to confirm this, a fly crawled over the snout, pausing to rub its feet together. Shaw vaulted over the side of the truck, unstrapping his shotgun and tentatively readying it against his shoulder. He swiveled his head, dark eyes darting back and forth as he scanned the clearing for any signs of motion in the trees. It wasn't unusual for an opportunistic predator to smell the blood from a hunt and take their chances tracking it to the source. The likelihood that he was in any danger was slim, but the weird look of the beast he'd killed was enough to make him suspicious of what was out there. But when time passed without another odd sound, he lowered his firearm with a snort. "I ain't got time to be jumping at shadows," he muttered. He was about to hitch his gun over his shoulder and jump onto the bed again, when the sound of bark scraping and twigs snapping made him jerk back around. For a second he didn't see anything, but then he caught the movement, the shift of fur and muscles against the trunk of a tree. He hadn't noticed it before, its brown fur blended with the bark, but he couldn't believe he could miss a pair of eyes like that. Huge and round, as big as dinner plates, bigger. It had been perched in the branches above his line of sight, its forelegs gripping the trunk as it slowly eased its way down the tree with all the lithe danger of a wild cat. It didn't look the same as the dead creature in Shaw's pickup, but it was just as absurd, resembling a cross between a long-eared bat and one of those weird things he'd seen in a National Geographic, a bush baby they'd called it. It was smaller, about half the size of the other beast, and despite its bat-like look, it had no wings. But it had the same off-putting human-looking arms and hands, fingers equipped with talons. Its rounded head had a wide mouth that stretched almost all the way to its pointed, bat-like ears, which flattened against its head as it hissed at him, revealing rows of pearly razor-sharp teeth. The glinting eyes narrowed, jaws pulling back into a snarl. Then it opened its mouth and emitted a ghastly, furious shriek, muscles tensing to spring. He slung his shotgun back into place, but wasn't quick enough to aim in time. The beast propelled itself off the tree, the slug missing it by seconds, ricocheting into a shower of bark, the deafening sound of the shot ringing through the woods. Shaw was knocked onto his back and slung across the forest floor with a single swipe from a huge set of claws. It tore through his clothes and only just scraped his flesh. He scrambled to get to his feet, bellowing a slew of swear words in his panic and rage. The beast crouched low to the ground mere feet from him, muscles tensing for another lunge. It gave a high-pitched screech that ended in a low, growling hiss. Shaw knew he had no chance without distance. Gripping the shotgun in both hands, he struck out, clubbing the creature in the face with the butt right above its huge left eye. It drew back with a scream of pain, and Shaw was on his feet, running. He could hear it coming after him, the scratching of bark and rustling of leaves, letting him know it was leaping from tree to tree, ready to drop on top of him. He reached the edge of the steep drop, the river chuckling below him. Forced to go no further, he turned on his heel, cocking and gripping the shotgun with white knuckles and tensed shoulders as he scanned the treetops. He heaved for breath, letting out a feral growl of his own. "Where are you?" he spat out, voice ringing back to him. "Come and get me." He'd barely let the words out when a huge, furry body pounced from the underbrush in a wild flurry of leaves and dirt. Shaw yelled, adjusting his arm and firing, but again the creature was too fast for him, the bullet only sending up a blast of earth into his eyes and nose. Another blow from a hefty, clawed hand as he backed up to avoid teeth, claws, and dirt knocked him off balance. He lost his footing with a howl of surprise, plummeting into the river with stomach-dropping speed as the ground vanished from beneath him. The cold water shocked the breath out of him, but he had enough forethought to sling his shotgun over his shoulder, arms and legs flailing as he fought the current. His head breached the surface long enough to see the beast glaring down at him from the top of the bluff, before it turned away, and the water dragged Shaw under again. Shaw lay spread-eagled against a flat, mossy boulder, soaked through and seething. His orange down vest had worked as something of a buoy against the river, and being an outdoorsman made him a strong swimmer. However, he'd been carried a good distance before he'd managed to drag himself to dry land, and he wasn't sure exactly how far out he was. The man who'd hired him hadn't bothered to mention that there were two of the big ugly freaks out here in the woods. Hell, Shaw would guess that he didn't have any idea what was out here at all. But what could you expect from someone with enough money to pay $10,000 a hide? He had plenty of cash to pay some low-class sap to get killed so he could avoid the risk himself. Shaw rubbed the right side of his jaw, wincing. He'd hit his face against a rock when he'd fought with the current, and the spot was beginning to swell. He stuck a grimy finger into his mouth, massaging his swelling gums and feeling each yellowed, crooked tooth to check if any were loose. Aside from the pain, he hadn't taken any real damage, but his pride was a different matter. He forced a shaking hand into a soaked pocket of his pants, searching for his can of dip, and swore when he remembered that he'd left it on his front seat. He had no doubt that the carcass was being made into a feast and would be damaged beyond selling by the time he got back to his truck. If he wanted his payout, he'd have to get back fast. He sat up, rage giving him new energy. Just let the little slimeball try and not pay him after this. Taking action, Shaw slung his shotgun from his shoulder and examined it, before cursing and putting himself to the task of dismantling and cleaning the water out. He tore off his vest, red flannel boots and socks, leaving only his camouflage pants, squeezing and shaking out the water from everything while he let his gun dry, staying alert for any suspicious sounds or movement. The shotgun shells might be damaged, so he couldn't rely on firing it just yet anyway, and aside from the hunting knife firmly clipped to his belt, he was unarmed and vulnerable. It was a feeling he hated on principle. His thoughts were occupied on vengeful retribution against his client and the bitch that had attacked him. He was dead convinced it was a female, because no male animal would attack with such vindictive spite and ferocity. No, it was a lady beast, all right, no doubt about it. The client, a man by the name of Joseph Boyle, had not impressed Shaw, and he could tell that the feeling was mutual. When Shaw had driven onto Boyle's expensively landscaped property in his beat-up truck, blaring country music out of his speakers with the window open, wearing his grungiest but best hunting clothes, Mr. Boyle had made a polite effort to mask his disdain. "Frank Shaw, I presume?" he'd asked, folding his hands behind his back without offering a handshake, which was fine, because Shaw wouldn't have given him one if he had. Boyle was a short, pudgy, overdressed man that Shaw towered over by a good length. You could tell at a glance that he was the type who gave limp handshakes. Shaw spat a squirt of dip onto the manicured lawn, grinning as he saw Mr. Boyle flinch. What gave it away?" Yes, well, I was told that you were the best and professional," Mr. Boyle said, as he pointedly looked down his nose. "Always am," Shaw had agreed. "Pride myself in it. I got word that you got some money burning a hole in your pocket, and you want to spend it on getting something in those woods of yours removed." "Yes, I've been meaning to do something about it for a while now." Mr. Boyle gestured vaguely toward the fuzzy outline of expansive woods past an open field behind the mansion. He kept his words very guarded. "Of course, it's not wandered onto the main grounds, but it's only a matter of time until it does, and I can't have anything like that out there cause any sort of bad press. It's a liability." "And just what exactly is that out there?" Shaw had pointed at the woods. "Bear or something?" "No, it's not a bear." Mr. Boyle spoke slowly, not meeting Shaw's eyes. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Shaw. I don't know what it is. You ever go out in those woods?" Shaw picked at his tooth with a dirty, chipped fingernail. "Oh, heavens no. I've got no business with it." "Don't hunt?" Shaw hadn't bothered to hide his contempt. "No, that sort of thing doesn't attract me. I don't even own a gun. But I'm more than willing to rent the woods out to colleagues who do." "Well, what's stopping you from letting them pay you to hunt it then?" Shaw realized as he looked back on the conversation that he should have been more suspicious. He'd been too eager, the prospect of money clouding his judgment. Not like it would have mattered. He'd have taken the job, suspicious or not. "I have my reasons," Mr. Boyle retorted. "Are you up for the task or not, Mr. Shaw?" Shaw had laughed at that. "Now, how can I turn down $10,000 and the opportunity to hunt on such fine, exclusive property?" He sneered at Mr. Boyle. "Let me guess. That money ain't just for the animal, is it? You want me to keep my mouth shut, is that right?" Mr. Boyle had glared at him. "If you're willing, I'll have you sign the paperwork. I want it dead, but bring it back in one piece." Shaw had taken that as a very clear yes. Even now as he looked back on it, pulling his wrung-out clothes back on, he wasn't sure what the secrecy was about. Sure, they were weird-looking animals, but what didn't Joseph Boyle want his rich buddies to know? Why not take the opportunity to make a profit off of exclusive game? But Mr. Boyle's strange decision meant money in Shaw's pocket, so he wouldn't question it. Whether he was dealing with aliens from outer space or a science experiment gone wrong, his only job was to pump it full of lead and dump it on Mr. Boyle's immaculate back porch. Though not as dry and prepared as he would have liked, Shaw hitched his reassembled shotgun over his shoulder and began the trek upstream. It was thanks to the river running a straight course that he knew he wasn't lost. But how far he was from his truck, he couldn't say. It was going to get dark in an hour or two, and he didn't fancy getting caught out alone and unprotected. He made his way cautiously, alert, darting glances to the treetops and underbrush at the faintest sound. He was hyper-aware that his boots still sloshed from the wet, his socks still soggy and gross on his bare skin. The bird song and murmuring of the river did nothing to relax him. The cabin, nestled in a clearing with a view of the river, was a welcome surprise. But it made sense that it was there, and Shaw was more than relieved to see it. After all, Boyle had mentioned renting the woods to his buddies, so of course they'd be accommodated by a comfortable hunting lodge. At the very least, it gave Shaw a new option to consider, and it was a favorable one. On one hand, he could stay the night, mostly secure from whatever may be lurking in the dark, waiting for him, and on the other, there might be some supplies he could use, like ammo. He approached the back door, boots creaking against the wooden steps, still making sure to glance around, listening for suspicious noises. He pressed his face against a window, but it was too dark to get a good look. He doubted anyone was currently staying inside, not if Boyle was dealing with a liability, as he put it. Shaw gritted his teeth. He'd been expecting to sleep in his trunk if the hunt took days, and knowing that this luxury hadn't been mentioned was an insult. He tried the door, but as to be expected, it was locked. Shaw went down the steps and tried the front door, but that was locked too. He was more than happy to break down the door, if only to vent his frustration, but it didn't come to that. On second glance, he saw that one of the front windows was open, raised just high enough to get his hands under. It lifted with a groan of wood, and Shaw swung one long leg inside, ducking his head as he pulled the rest of his body after it. The floorboards creaked as he meandered along, taking in his surroundings with a few nods of approval. "Not bad," he whistled. "Not bad at all." It was nothing elaborate, only one floor with an open layout and a high-angled ceiling. Everything from the double bed, the kitchen, and the dining table was in the same space. No doubt a rich man's idea of roughing it. The few doors he found to open only led to a bathroom with a standing shower and a few closets. It was cozy and stylishly furnished. It even had a chandelier, and the bed was made with a heavy white comforter and several lacy throw pillows. Shaw began to search the place, opening drawers and cupboards as he stomped about on the hunt for canned food. Now he had a moment to relax. He realized that he was ravenously hungry. Today's excitement, having worked up his appetite. Wrenching open one of the cabinets, revealed a few cans of clam chowder, probably left by the last guests. Even better, the cans had pull tops. Shaw tore open the can, snatched a spoon from the dish drainer, woofing down the cold, gloppy lumps of concentrated soup without bothering to get a bowl or heat it over the stove. Fishy-smelling chunks caught on his chin, and he wiped them back into his mouth with the palm of his hand. He slowed down, scraping his food around inside of the can. A bit odd that there were dishes in the drainer and not in the drawer. Not unheard of, but if a past guest had forgotten to put them away, why wasn't there a layer of dust? And why were there dirty dishes still in the sink, and trash in the trash can, all of which seemed fresh, and there was no mold or rotten odor? There was a film of dried and greasy soap bubbles around the rim of the sink drain too, as if someone had pulled the plug not too long ago. Shaw licked his spoon, contemplating what this could mean in his head, when he heard a soft noise. It reminded him of a cat. A stray cat wandering into the woods was possible. Shaw clucked his tongue, placing the empty soup can on the counter, calling softly, "Here, kitty, kitty." He fidgeted with the hilt of his hunting knife. An animal was just meat and skin after all, and meat was meat. Another soft mewl, and now he knew it was inside the house. Somewhere by the bed if he had to guess. He approached slowly, clucking his tongue again. He heard a clear response again. He'd overlooked that bottom drawer of the bedside table was open a crack. From inside it, something mewled. Cautiously, Shaw pulled it open all the way and almost dropped his hunting knife. "The hell?" Staring up at him, surrounded in a nest of sheets, was a baby.